I made this Hornet costume in 72 hours. That's 3 days, and for some reason, it's one of the best things I've ever made. Okay, quick context here. I have 3 massive ongoing projects, and I was feeling a little burnt out about it. I need a nice relaxing break, and for some reason, my brain has decided that comes in the form of a super tight time challenge. I know it seems a little silly, a little counterintuitive, but hear me out here. I think that there's something to be said about something really quick and fun for that sweet, sweet instant gratification. So I put some ideas out to my Patreon supporters and they voted on their favorite. Hello, I'm Miss Twisted. You guys can call me Charlotte. I do cosplay, crafting, and other weird and whimsical stuff, and I am making Hornet from Hollow Knight and Silksong. But I've got 3 days to complete this, so let's jump straight into it. Hornet's design is pretty simple and striking. It's basically a red lampshade with a spooky mask, peak character design. For me, that's gonna mean a red skirt and a red cloak of some sort with some kind of cosplay magic to keep the hemline all poofy and a nice dramatic high collar. The mask is gonna be some kind of big old slab of foam, but I'm debating putting like wood grain texture into it just for some dimension. I'll figure that part out later. Hornet's trusty weapon needle, pretty straightforward, more foam, but I really want to add the thread that's tied to needle in the games. I don't know yet if that will work. That is a problem for future Charlotte. Jumping into it with the fabric, I've got these 2 cotton linen blends. They are so soft, they are drapey, they're gonna be breathable, they are perfect. I just didn't have enough of either, so I kind of want to use both. It's just this one is too bright a red, and this one's more of that like purpley winey color, which means it's time to dye. I didn't think that through, but I'm not mad about this lovely new sash. Anyway, this one's getting thrown in with some wine colored dye. My hope is to just bring it into a darker red, and this one's gonna be in a pot of scarlet soup. I know that the dye is not necessarily going to make it lighter, but it might take that purpley tone out. Long story short, my aim is to get these colors to kind of meet somewhere in the middle, I guess. To the kitchen. So we've got 2 giant pots of hot but not boiling water, one with the wine dye, one with the scarlet. All right, both of these are getting a little bit of salt in them as well. The packets always seem to suggest adding salt. I guess it helps it. No, almost got lost in the soup. Also gonna chuck, oh, I've already dripped dye there. That took me like 30 seconds flat. Guys, the fact that my entire house is not covered in stains is quite frankly a miracle. And I think I've just realized this is not gonna be big enough for the scarlet dye pot, and I don't really want to cut it yet because I don't know where I'm going to cut it. I didn't think this through. We're not off to a good start here, guys. Am I going to try it anyway? Yes, I am. Also, this is not usually how you dye fabric. You usually want enough room for it to move around, and you want to wet the fabric first to make sure the dye is really evenly soaked into the fabric. I don't really care about it being even for this one, so it's just going straight in there all sponged up. Sponged up? You know what I mean. Okay, round 2. So they're still soaking on the stove, but what I did was take some scissors and just snip the corner off. I ironed it to basically do a little quick dry so that I can see how the color's turning out. This is basically this bright red linen with that wine colored dye on it. That is a beautiful rich dark red now. The winey colored fabric has had like a slightly more subtle change, but it has gone for that darker rich red and less of the purpley tone. So basically exactly what I wanted. So my thoughts are the slightly lighter weight fabric for the dress part, and then this heavier weight stuff for the cloak. It's not going to keep me like super warm like a wool cloak will, but just had an idea. Give me a second. Oh my god, you guys, I'm so happy I have this. That's fine. This is a pure wool cloak. It's an ivory one. I made it for a wedding, and I was lamenting the fact that I'm never really gonna wear an ivory colored thing ever again, and had planned to dye it anyway. Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking? And for this one, we're putting in a little bit of white vinegar because apparently vinegar helps soak into protein fibers, so basically wools and silks. And I've combined the leftover scarlet and wine dye in here, so it should give me a dark red on that wool, maybe. Dyeing fabric's always a little bit of a gamble. That's just part of the fun. And if you thought I was pushing my luck with the red fabrics the size of this cloak, trying to shove it into this tiny pot, this was a recipe for disaster. Okay, these have been washed and are hung up to dry, but can you see on this one here how there's a lot of that like uneven tie-dye kind of effect? That is exactly because I'm trying to squeeze way too much fabric into those little pots so that all of that dye is sort of pooling in those scrunched and folded areas. But not gonna lie, it kind of slaps. I just kind of think it adds some cool texture. And if I'm honest, I totally expect the same thing with the wool cloak, because over ambitious doesn't quite cut it. I needed like twice the size of pot for these. Okay, while that fabric is drying, we've got to get a wriggle on, so I'm moving straight onto the mask. Shape-wise, I have a rough idea on how I'm going to cut this out of foam. I have made this Kindred mask before. This was one of my Patreon requests, and the video on how I made this one is also up on Patreon. But that general face shape towards the bottom is not too far off what I'm going to aim for. At the very least, it should just give me a solid base. Now, even on my bigger projects, I'm not usually a measurements kind of guy. I'm more of a vibes-based cosplayer. So, of course, there's no plan here. I'm just cutting out roughly what I think is the right shape for the face, heating up the EVA foam so it gets a little bit soft and malleable, and then holding it over my mannequin head to create those curves. Now, my plan was to put all of my contact adhesive on outside, but I chickened out because it was freezing cold. But back inside, I did have my workshop fully ventilated and my respirator on. Safety first, guys. From here on out, everything was just kind of figuring out problems as I went. The mask was too flat, so I cut these notches into the side, add in a forehead piece, more at the back of the horns. Just building this up step by step, well into the night. You know, vibe space stuff. Good morning, my loves. Welcome to day 2. The fabric has all dried overnight, and it is looking so good. These are my 2 fabrics that I'm using, and like close up, you can see that the colors are really close, and like even if there's a bit of difference, it's just variation, it's just texture, it's just detail. But these beautiful deep reds are just so delicious. I don't know why I always feel the need to describe color in terms of taste, but like I want to eat these, I'm sorry. Despite how nice these turned out, the wool cloak, it's definitely something. Again, the effect is kind of cool, but it kind of reminds me of like a moldy slab of meat or like zombie skin. I actually put a tiny bit of black in that dye pot to try and like deepen the color, which is why I've got all of these little dark spots here. Basically, this whole thing is a testament to my own hubris. This is girl bossing too close to the sun, just trying to squeeze a giant wool cloak into a pot that's not big enough with not enough dye and not enough space to move around. I'm gonna put this aside and worry about it later. It's still pretty usable. As for my mask, well, I've pretty much spent my early morning just kind of building up the rest of that shape to make it a complete piece. Usually with an EVA foam build, you would like have a pattern or a plan to start with and work off that rather than trying to build up the shape as it goes, but I had a really good time just doing it like this. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, except that the finished jigsaw puzzle doesn't exist yet, and actually the puzzle pieces don't exist yet. You have to kind of cut them out and shape them as you go. Okay, the jigsaw puzzle thing was a bad metaphor, but this is what it looks like on. And I don't know how well the audio is going to come through, so I'll leave this up for now, but the vision's pretty good. The shape is pretty good. Ignore the weird like eyelid things. That's just to sort of reinforce the foam around there. And the weird blotchy texture is because I tried to like wrap the whole thing in a craft foam to smooth everything out. Well, it didn't work. I was debating covering it in Warbler, but I think that's gonna add too much weight to it, especially with these big old horns. Unfortunately, the seams are so ratty that I do think it's gonna need some more coverage before I start doing priming and painting. So I'm gonna try my own weird version of paper mache. Okay, weird version of paper mache, but first I'm gonna start with ripping up some masking tape and taping up over not just the seams, but the whole mask. My hope is that this will reinforce it a little bit and kind of smooth out the shape, and it does mean that if some of that texture or lumpiness still shows through, it's mostly going to be in the form of those lines that go all in the same direction like wood grain. Also, I'd like to avoid using foam clay or anything that involves sanding. The paper mache part comes with painting on Flex Bond and layering on bits of torn tissue paper. And you might have guessed at this point, the reason I'm choosing such unconventional methods is because I don't want to have to go and buy anything new, so I'm trying to find main things I have around the house to make this. Okay, the mask is outside drying. Luckily, we've got a pretty warm and sunny day for winter, so hopefully that shouldn't take too long. In the meantime, welcome to my floor, because we got to figure out how to do Hornet's weapon, needle. For that, I've got a couple of pieces of this ultra thick EVA foam. I think this is a 10 millimeter. They're all cut into these triangle shapes because I cut them originally on the diagonal to get a really long strip for something. Anyway, it got me thinking about the fact that I really just need 4 really long triangles to stick together into like a sword-like shape for the base. If that doesn't make sense, you'll figure it out as we go. Now, cutting 10 millimeter EVA foam is actually just a huge pain in the butt. It's just very thick and that makes it unwieldy. You have to make sure your hobby knife goes all the way through, and I'm trying to cut a very beveled edge here, so I'm cutting on an angle already. All of this is also my excuse for why my seams and cut lines were a little bit ratty. So from there I cut a second piece and the beveled edges kind of mirrored, so they kind of come together like this. And then I cut 2 more exactly the same, so that should give me like my 4 sides. They also got some little triangles that kind of come on the end like this. So let's go take advantage of that sunny weather and do some gluing outside, hey? A little bit less freezing outside, but I'm still wearing my respirator even when I'm working out here. Alright, promising start. I think I just need to make sure that this bevel at the edge is a bit sharper because they're not going to join up like that without like completely ruining the angle here. And I don't know if I can just cut that with a hobby knife, so I'm going to see if I can take to them with a Dremel. I was kind of hoping I could get through this project without having to do any sanding or dremeling, just because I can't stand the sensation of the residue and dust that comes off it. But in this case, I just had to suck it up because it was just too effective to take off all of that bulk so that I can glue both of these pieces down into those lovely crisp seams. Meanwhile, mask is fully dry. I'm gonna chuck some automotive filler primer over this one. It's just gonna help me see that texture a little bit better and hopefully fill out some of the gaps. Needle is looking fantastic. You can see I've left one end still open here. That is like the only instance of foresight that I've had in any of this project, but I've left it open so that I can get into here and add some reinforcements around this thing here, which is literally just an aluminium rod that I've shoved in there, and that's just going to form the handle and like reinforcement through the middle. Up this end here, I've 3D printed myself a little donut with a hole in it. Well, I suppose that makes it our donut with 2 holes. Anywho, that is going to form the eye of the needle up here. Now, as for the mask, let's be honest, I kind of dug myself into a hole here where the actual paper mache thing I had just made it more lumpy, not less lumpy, and I don't know what I expected. I started to sort of like desperately and frustratingly wet sand this thing until I had this epiphany of, hang on a second, I've given myself a 72-hour deadline so that I can have the challenge of doing it in 72 hours. Why am I trying to aim for the sleekest, cleanest build I've ever done? That's not the point of this. So this one's going back outside. I'm going to do a couple of layers of Plastidip, get it ready for painting, and then I'm not going to touch it. While those layers of Plastidip are drying, I'm gluing in a couple of pieces of foam just into this sword to cushion around where the aluminium rod sits. Once that's filled out so the rod's not going anywhere, I'm going to apply those last few pieces to the end here. And of course, the donut-shaped sword hilt is getting some priming and painting too. Okay, it's around 9:45 p.m, so end of day 2. The last step with the mask was basically like just putting the black mesh into the eye so we get that lovely blank soulless stare. Little bit of elastic straps in the back here just to kind of hold it on my head a bit more. And in terms of painting, as you can tell, since I soft locked myself out of having like a perfect sleek smooth mask, I've just sort of leaned into the texture and gone for like this sort of dry brushing effect. Actually, this might count as a sort of reverse dry brushing. Over my white base layer, I'm painting a light gray and then just wiping off the excess very carefully so that essentially on all of those raised areas it's paler and then it stays a little darker in the cracks. Just to finish it off, I'm adding in some darker areas around the eyes and a couple little lines up and down the mask. Anyway, she'll get a couple of top coats tomorrow to protect the paintwork, but apart from that, this one's done. That's not to say that I'm done for the day, despite it being almost 10 p.m. I kind of want to get at least my basic shapes cut out of the fabric tonight, because we are past the halfway mark for this challenge, and I'm getting a little nervous about the timing. Luckily, all the shapes I need from the fabric are really straightforward. I just want a circle skirt and a circle cape. Rather than poorly explain to you guys how to do circle skirts, I'm gonna link a resource in the description below. I will honestly take any excuse to make a circle skirt or circle cape because they are so freaking easy once you get your head around them and don't really require a ton of sewing. Alright folks, day 3. First off, quick update that this is where needle is at, just a couple of layers of Plastidip and filler. Looking pretty good. I'm gonna put that aside for now and come back to it just because I am so impatient to do some sewing. So circle skirt for my first layer, and I kind of want to try using some horsehair braid, which is this sort of crinoline type stuff that's really stiff and essentially should help like hold the skirt and give it some body around the hem. I haven't used this stuff before in a project. I was concerned about the fact that this stuff is like dead straight, and of course with circle skirts, your hemline is a circle. But apparently with this stuff, if you iron it, you can actually curve it. So let's give that a try. Also, don't at me for the filthy state of this ironing board. I haven't yet washed it after doing like a bunch of dyes and paints over this thing. Just ignore that for a moment, all right? So apparently you can kind of like pull it into a slight curve as you iron it, and it'll hold that curve. That went surprisingly easily. And this is gonna be the laziest hem ever. I'm literally gonna like place the horsehair braid like this and like fold the edge once and sew it. Does that mean there's gonna be raw edges on the inside? Yeah, but just don't tell anyone, all right? If I hold this up, all right, I like that. So you can kind of see the vibe, right? Like it just gives that hemline a lot of body. Guys, I lied. I can't deal with having a raw edge under here. I'm just worried that's gonna fray like crazy the second I wash it. One thing I did buy that I didn't think I was gonna use is some like red bias binding. Not the exact color of red, but I'm thinking rather than sewing it like a bias binding on both sides, I might just kind of do that and use it to sort of cover up the inside like raw edge, and it'll cover up the remaining bit of horsehair braid that's sticking out like this. With my raw edges of shame sufficiently hidden away, I took some of the offcut material, cut myself a rectangle sewn together on one end, turn it inside out. That's gonna be my waistband. Circle skirt pretty much done. This has been like the laziest and fastest circle skirt ever. I'm having a great time. At the back here, I've left a gap in the waistband. That's just basically because I didn't want to really muck around with like zips or Velcro or like elastic. So what I'm gonna do is just chuck a couple of grommets coming down the edges here and basically do like a little crisscross lacy thing so I can tie it at the back. It also means it's gonna be adjustable for me, which I like. Realistically, I don't know if putting in grommets and lacing is necessarily less work than putting in elastic, but honestly, it's an excuse for me to use my grommet press, which is one of my favorite cosplay tools I've ever gotten, so it's worth it. Ever since I got my grommet press, I have just found an excuse to put grommets or rivets in pretty much every cosplay. I regret nothing. This thing is just so satisfying to use. So funnily enough, as much as I like how this skirt is sitting as a general thing, for the cosplay for Hornet, it's actually much longer than I was expecting. Annoyingly, if I'd cut the skirt slightly shorter, I might have had enough fabric left for like a whole second circle skirt, because I only have this semicircle left of that same fabric, which is not quite enough for like that full fluffy circle cloak I was hoping for. And right now it's giving more like, what are those popes, the mini popes called in red? Cardinals. So the cloak was made entirely with that heavier weight fabric and using exactly the same method except ruffling it at the top. For the collar, we've got a rectangle with some iron-on stabilizer just sewn straight onto the top. So this is the cloak so far. You can kind of see like the length that I'm going for is just above the knee there. And I've done exactly the same thing as I did with the previous one where it's got the horsehair braid and the, what's it called? What's this stuff called? The ribbon that goes on a curve. Bias binding. The main difference here is that this one was only a 3/4 of a donut rather than like a full donut, just because that's how much fabric I had to work with. So for my collar, I was thinking about just having them like join directly in the center like this, but I have a feeling that's going to give Dracula. The alternative to that is leaving this flappy bit here extending past on this side and connecting it over here, and then it kind of gives that sort of anime protagonist cowl effect. I know that there's an anime character in my head that I'm thinking of that has a cloak like that. Someone in the comments tell me what his name is. Anywho, not missing another chance to use my press, I'm putting in some snap fasteners, also known as press studs. I'm not actually sure if they're different things. Now, since the skirt is definitely too long, I'm going to use the leftover fabric here to cut out some of these little singlet top pieces, sew them together into the most basic top ever, and sew that to the skirt. Alright, cape is done, dress is almost done, but it is past my bedtime, so I'm gonna wait till tomorrow to show you guys those, and at least that way you can see it in the daylight. Okay, good morning, folks. The sewing was finished off last night, and I did a couple little seams and hems this morning, but in general, look at how cool this cloak is. I'm incredibly happy with it. The silhouette is like exactly what I was hoping for, and I'm really glad I did take the time to cover up this inside area, because as you can see, anytime the arms are up, you can see that little flash of the inside. Most importantly, look at how cool this collar is. Like, you can sit it all the way up like this. You can kind of like pull it out a little bit for some breathing room, and give me a sec. If you just fold it down a little bit like this, you can get this nice little asymmetrical, artistically folded collar. And even though it's a relatively thick fabric, it's linen and cotton, so it should keep me relatively cool even in a convention, which is a definite bonus, because I don't think I really want to take this off at any point unless I absolutely have to, because the dress underneath is the ugliest dress I've ever made. I look like I'm going for my first day of preschool. Also, it's got pockets. They're very bad pockets, but they'll do the job. This side here is my pocket of shame, because I tried to just sort of cut into it horizontally and sew in a pocket, and I didn't think about the fact that if you're not going on the seam, it's gonna like pull all of this fabric and bulge it outwards, which is why I've kind of sewn up a little bit here. There's still an opening here, and I've got these press studs to like seal it up again, but I'm probably not going to use this pocket unless it's for emergencies. So on this side, I took the laziest way possible and literally just sewed the pocket to the outside. I don't care about whether or not it looks good, because it's going to be under the cloak. You're not going to see it anyway. But we are still not done. We still have to finish off Needle, and don't come for me about it being day 4 on a 3-day build, because day 1, I didn't even start recording the intro until late afternoon. So as far as I'm concerned, I've still got a little bit of time. And quite frankly, I could just spray paint this silver, but it's raining and miserable outside, and there's something I want to try. I've seen in cosplay more and more people doing a thing where instead of painting their props, they're essentially stretching fabric over it, because it leaves like a really, really smooth finish. And I kind of want to try that here. So I have this sort of like stretchy, metallic, fake vinyl lycra stuff, and my thoughts are to try and see if I can like stretch and glue over this to kind of create that silver. I figured since the sword is a relatively simple shape, basically just a long triangle, it's a pretty good place to start with this technique. To get the rough pattern I need, I've pinned this in place and then pulled out the sword, basically sewing it together like a long sword sock. On second thoughts, don't quote me on that, it sounds like a euphemism. Anywho, since this is a 4-way stretch fabric, it conforms so beautifully to the shape of the sword. To secure this in place, down at the base, I've got some contact adhesive and stretching that last part over, so the only wrinkly and weird part is right on the sides of the seams. Barely noticeable once I cut off the excess fabric. And hey, while we're here, I'm going to use some fabric glue to wrap the handle in that same vinyl. It'll give me a nice comfy grip, and there's no paint to chip off. You guys, look at how good this looks. I am so chuffed. Needle is almost done. There is one last detail I want to do, which is the thread that comes off the end here. And for that, I've got some silver cording. But this stuff is going to be very loose and floppy. It's not really going to look very good. So I'm going to try and literally shove some armature wire through the center of the twisted cord and see if that helps just like hold some body. And you know, guys, this took forever. This was so tedious. I'm 100% sure there's a better way to do this. Put your suggestions in the comments, I guess. So So it might have taken me like an hour to shove all of that wire into this cord, but I think it's gonna be worth it. It already looks pretty good, but I think it's gonna look even better from a distance. For now, that's taken me pretty much to lunchtime, which means we're bang on those 3 days. I'm gonna go shove some food in my face because oh my gosh, I'm hungry, and then I can do a bit of a reveal with it all together. Okay, extended lunch break and cleanup break later, and I'm once again losing the daylight, so let me just talk you through everything. I've already kind of shown you guys the cloak, but I have one extra layer under here. You guys remember the wool cloak from earlier that turned out that weird zombie skin texture? Well, I put it back in a dye pot after a good thorough wash, and it's a much nicer color now. So I've got it layered under the main cloak because it just means that if I'm wearing this out in like the woods and it's freezing cold, I am going to be so snug under here. Needle is looking absolutely fantastic. I'm not 100% sold on the string, so you guys let me know what you think. I kind of like the idea of it, like to pose with it. I'm just not sure if it like is really necessary for how unwieldy it's gonna be. Alright, not sure how much of this you guys can hear, but I might take this outside for a spin before we lose the light completely, because let's be honest, this room is just like not big enough to get this in frame. Even just gallivanting around my backyard really told me this is one of the comfiest cosplays I've ever worn, even with that mask. Chuong Photography joined me for a photo shoot, and yes, I threw together this little horns because I couldn't leave well enough alone, and I wanted a couple of shots showing my face. But it really is with the mask and overall silhouette of this costume that really makes it. Those long white horns, that silver sword, and that delicious deep red just pops so nicely against those green glady backgrounds. It was absolutely worth clambering through the undergrowth and into storm pipes. So on a personal level, this little speed build was exactly what I needed. Sure, I've got a laundry list of things I would do differently or upgrades I might make later on. Also, a few different steps and planning things out, and I reckon I could have smashed this out in a day. But the point of this project was never about making the best cosplay or even the fastest. It was to force myself to let go of aiming for perfect or meeting some self-imposed standard. Since I've turned cosplay into a job, I think sometimes I need to remind myself why I fell in love with it in the first place. And quite honestly, I had a really damn good time making this one. I hope you all enjoyed this one too. I'm definitely feeling a little bit more motivated to tackle those big projects now. I've got a Jester, Fawn, and Angel to finish, and I can't wait. Thank you so much to my ultimate supporters. These are my top supporters on Patreon. And since it just occurred to me that I should have been wearing the cloak the whole time in the outro, I'm at least going to announce the names a bit dramatically. Artemis, Michael, Mixranvi, Rakishan, Residual Images, Robert Mischief, Tamara, Verilyn, and Yuri. Thank you also to these other amazing Patreon people who are on screen now. If you'd like to join us over on Patreon, I post work in progress previews and occasional mini videos exclusive to Patreon. Not to mention, my Patreon supporters literally chose this project. And hey, you guys have got good enough taste that I might let you choose what I make again sometime. Anywho, link is down in the description below if you want to join us over on Patreon. But if you're here watching, liking, subscribing, all that good stuff that make the YouTube robots happy, you are supporting me. So thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time. Bye!